Welcome, and today's video we're going to be talking about training and essentially what I knew or what I wish I knew when I first started lifting weights about 12 years ago. So this is going to be some part sciencey, some part bro science, a lot of personal experience. At the end of the day, I'm just speaking to what's true for myself. Everyone's journey is going to be, of course, different. So take from this what you will. If there's anything that you disagree with, feel free to leave a comment below. And maybe share some of your own experience. So at the end of the day, when it comes to training, our goal is to accumulate new muscle tissue and or build strength. Now, the reason I say and or is because a competitive powerlifter that wants to compete in the, let's say, the 100 kilo weight class, they're not going to want to gain a maximal amount of muscle because that's going to put them out of that 100 kilo weight class. Vice versa, a bodybuilder that's wanting to step on stage with a very lean muscular physique is not necessarily going to want or need to squat or bench or deadlift X number of weight. There is no part of the bodybuilding competition where the judges ask you how much you bench, and that is factored into judging. So keep that in mind when we're looking at this. I wanted to find a couple of key terms because these are terms that as a new lifter, you're going to be experiencing and hearing a lot about. And so I think it makes sense to kind of simplify what these terms mean. So when we think of the weight that's being used, that can also be referred to as the load or as the intensity. Essentially, kind of what is being used throughout this movement. Now, when we think about reps, we also want to think about volume. And now volume can also have to do with sets as well. And so there's a per set volume, but then there's also a total volume. And when we talk about total volume, we want to talk about Prilepin's chart, which we will here in a little bit. But when we're thinking about weight, load, and intensity, we're thinking of them in different percentages. So there's a maximal weight that you can achieve for one singular rep. That would be considered a 1 rep max. There's also a weight that you can achieve for 10 reps on that same exercise that would be considered a 10 rep max. So when we're thinking about these things, everyone wants to talk about their maxes, but maxes are really, they're difficult because a max is going to look different on each day. You can peak properly to achieve maybe more output. You can rest more, you can do a deload. There's a lot of different ways that you can improve your 1 rep max. And for that reason, when I'm writing programs for people, I always want to consider their training 1 rep max. So what could you achieve for 1 rep, a really hard effort? You're just walking into the gym, no music, no pre-workout. You just are tasked with hitting 1 single heavy rep. Whatever weight that is, let's consider that to be our 1 rep max, even though it's not a true 1 rep max because you technically could do more under the right circumstances, but that would be considered your training 1 rep max. So I got off track, but let's return back to that. The other thing that you'll hear people talk about is your frequency. So this is essentially how many times in a given period, typically a week, are you going to be training to hit that specific body part. So most of the time, people are going to be working with a 1 to 3 times per week frequency. And really, I kind of think of that a little bit like a spectrum. The more frequent you are with that specific muscle group, the more likely it is that it's a small muscle group, and also the more likely it is that your training is relatively easy in terms of intensity, load, and weight. Now, on the flip side, the less often you're working a specific muscle group, I tend to think that you're probably working a larger muscle group, so it's taking more from a central nervous system standpoint in terms of fatigue, and you're typically working with heavier, harder weights. So your load is going to be typically a lot harder in those weeks than it would be if you were hitting it 3 times per week per se. So when I'm talking to new lifters, and there's a lot of educational content out there on social media, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, all those types of things. And that's a lot of good content. But one of the things as someone that's been training for this extended period of time that I've seen that I think is really important to notice, and if there's anything you can walk away from this video with today, it would be this, is as a beginner, as someone new to the gym, your goal should not be here in terms of load, weight, and intensity. Your goal should be volume and reps. And I'll tell you why. The reason being, the more reps, the more sets, the more volume you do, the more experienced you become with each type of lift. And the reason why that's important is what works for you in terms of lifts is not going to work for me. What works for me is not going to work for you. We have separate goals, we have different anatomies, we have different backgrounds, We have different number of years or times, months, weeks, whatever, training. And so the reason why this is important for beginners to understand is because you want as much experience as humanly possible in that specific movement to not only know if that movement's right for you, but also to be able to troubleshoot and make that movement right for you. So for example, for chest, I really like a very slight incline bench. I call it an incline bench, some could call it a flat bench, but I really like, we're talking a 15 to 20 degree incline for a bench press. I love that. I feel a great connection to my pec. I feel a great movement. But I got that through years and years and years of being like, man, flat bench is great, but it puts a little bit of stress on my shoulder. Let me incline this slightly to get the stress off the shoulder. Man, I feel that a lot more in my pecs. Perfect, let's continue with that. So you're gonna have to troubleshoot. You're gonna have to find movements that work for you, not movements that work for everyone else. And in doing so, it's best to do that with a lot of reps and a lot of volume so that you can get a lot more experience under the bar, so to speak. So as a beginner, I would be really advocating for something like 15 to 25 sets in total per week on the specific muscle group. So let's say you're doing, let's start off at the high end, let's say you're doing 20 sets per body part. Well, I'm gonna choose to train each body part twice per week. So each session that I'm training that body part, I'm gonna hit 10 sets for that specific session. So that could be 5 sets of a flat bench, 5 sets of an incline fly. There I check off my chest as having achieved 10 sets for that specific workout. And then maybe the other session that week, I'm gonna do a flat fly, and then I'm gonna do an incline press. So on one day I'm doing an incline fly, the other day I'm doing an incline press. One day I'm doing a flat bench, the other time I'm doing a flat fly. And that would be 2 times per week, total volume of about 20 sets, split between 10 sets per each session, and that would be a frequency of 2. Now, your total volume is gonna be high as a beginner, but as you become more experienced, your total intensity, meaning the weights that you're lifting, and the total volume are gonna come here. So your total volume per session is gonna come down, but your total intensity is gonna get a lot higher. Why is that? Well, as an experienced lifter, you're gonna be using a lot heavier weights that require more effort, weights that while you're still doing, let's say for 6 to 10 reps, you're getting a lot more physically fatigued from those sets. So that's why I think that from this perspective, and this timeline is gonna look different for everyone. I don't want to say, this timeline is going to look different for everyone. I'm not going to say, it takes 2 years to be experienced, and I'm not going to say it takes 10 years to be experienced. I think it's different for each person, and I think that there's something to be understood about when you think that you're experienced, go another step farther, because a lot of times, it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect if you want to look it up, but a lot of times we think we've mastered or we think we really truly understand a topic, and then we just realize how much we don't know about that specific topic. It's called the peak of Mount Stupidity. Look it up. There's a graph online that I'm sure you can learn from. But just understand that there's always more to learn in capacity to weightlifting. I've been doing this for 12 years. I still know just an inkling of the iceberg, and there's so much more to learn. But I want to be able to share the stuff that I do know with you. So when it comes to total volume, total all that type of stuff, one of the things another thing that you should look up and pay attention to is called Prilepin's chart. Now this gears more towards your strength-based lifters. So this is something that I referenced and used a lot when I was powerlifting, when I was coaching powerlifting, all that type of stuff. Prilepin's chart is essentially designed by this guy named Prilepin, and he kind of took together what is considered optimal in terms of volume, in terms of weight. And so what he did is he divided our 1 rep maxes into multiple groups, into 4 different groups. So if you're working with 55 to 65% of your 1 rep max, so assume your 1 rep max is 100 pounds, so 55 to 65 pounds, 3 to 6 reps per set is great. A total rep range per that specific movement, 18 to 30, great. An optimal rep range, 24. So that would be 6, 12, 18, 24. That would be 4 sets of 6 with 55 to 65% would be the most optimal for that specific compound movement. Now, a couple things about Prilepin's chart. Even in hypertrophy training, so focusing on gaining more muscle, not gaining more strength per se, this is still a really great chart to follow for your compound movements. I'm talking things like bench, rows, pull downs, presses. I mean, your main motions, all that type of stuff. Now, when we're thinking about motion specifically, I want to switch gears a little bit to talk about some of this stuff. So if we flip this board around, this is my first time doing it, so hopefully that works well. I want to talk a little bit about anatomy fundamentals. So some of the things that are super important when it comes to how you're working in the gym is very just briefly understanding stacking joints. This is essentially saying that if you're pressing something, so let's say I'm pressing something, you want your elbow underneath of the weight. So if I'm doing a bench press and I'm coming like this, I want my elbow underneath of that weight. Now you can see that if my elbow were here, that's gonna put a lot of external rotation on me. Or if my elbow is here, it's gonna put a lot of internal rotation on me. So fundamentally speaking, when it comes to lifting weights or when it comes to any type of exercise, you wanna think about stacking your joints. The same is true with your squat. Your squat is in such a way that at the end of the motion, your heels should be under your knees should be under your hips should be under your shoulders, and your shoulders should be under the load that's coming down from the squat. So stacking the joints, super important. The other thing that's super important is understanding hinge mechanics. Hinge mechanics are gonna be what's used in your deadlift, your RDLs, all those different types of motions. And when we're thinking about hinges, we wanna very carefully consider them as pulley systems, not as fishing poles. And this is something that I see all the time with young lifters. So when they're coming in for their deadlift ends up looking like a fishing pole, meaning that they're bending under the weight. They're trying to pull up the weight. When we think of it as a pulley system, we think of your hips a little bit like the counterweight, and we think of the weight at the end a little bit like the bar. And that's gonna look a lot different, because then I'm gonna come into this position, I'm gonna sit my hips back as the weight pulls off the ground, and I'm gonna be in much more of a pulley capacity than a fishing pole capacity. The other things that we really need to understand, especially as beginner lifters, and this is something that I wish I knew a lot earlier on, is understanding the rib cage, understanding breathing and bracing. You can withstand massive amounts of weights being loaded on your spine from the bench and from the deadlift and the squat, if you're understanding how to brace your core efficiently. What I've got drawn here, you can't really tell, is soda cans. A soda can that is full, that is pressurized, I can stand on that very easily. It's never gonna burst, it's never gonna break. A soda can that has a slight dent in the middle, even if it's pressurized, I step on that for 1 second, it's gonna bust. The reason why this is important is our rib cage is that soda can. If we're loading massive amounts of weight in the squat and our rib cage is not braced and tight, but our rib cage is open, or we're breathing out and we're pulling in, or we're breathing out and we're pushing it, whatever it may be, we're going to lose that brace and the weight's gonna come toppling down. We're gonna lose the ability to withstand that force. Other thing that's important is just your general range of motion. If you're doing a bench press, come all the way down, come all the way up. Now, some would argue that as you become more and more advanced, the lockout may not be as beneficial for muscle growth as the eccentric or the stretch position. This is something that's debated. This is something that bodybuilders years ago in the 90s and the 80s always emphasized as not really locking out the bench press, but more of just getting that deep stretch over and over again with the weight added. And so when we're thinking about range of motion, we're thinking about it in the concentric playing field, so the contraction. We're thinking of it in the eccentric playing field, so in the relaxation or the stretch of the muscle. Then we're also thinking of it in isometric field. So holding at the top would be an isometric, holding at the bottom would be an isometric, holding in the middle would be an isometric, that type of stuff. So when it comes to intensity techniques, these are things that I really think shouldn't be deployed until we're like here in the career, okay? So once you've kind of surpassed being a beginner, and I'm gonna say all of that with the exception of supersets. The reason why supersets are good is just this equals more volume. So that can sometimes be helpful for someone that's new, is just getting more total volume. But things like bands, supersets, TUT, time under tension, so like a 6 second down, 3 second hold, 4 seconds up, whatever it may be, that can be really fun from an intensity technique. Time differences, kind of under time under tension. Rest pause, that is essentially doing a set to, let's say, 20 to 25 reps. you barely make it to 20, you barely make it to 25 reps, whatever it may be, and then your next set, you try and get back to that same amount of reps, but you take a break in between. So let's say I'm doing squats, I load up 500 pounds, I do it for a set of 12, that was great. My second set, I'm gonna do 8, I'm gonna pause for 5 breaths, when I get back under the bar, I'm gonna do another 4 for a total of 12 again. Drop sets are a lot of fun, drop sets add a lot of intensity, depending on the machine or the weights that you're using. It can be really easy or really difficult, so choose accordingly. ISO holds, especially in terms of strength, isometric holds can be super awesome. Lockout holds, static holds at the top of your deadlift, just holding a bar on your back with a more amount of weight than what you're typically used to dealing with in squats can really get you good at bracing and understanding that core. So lastly, I want to leave you a little bit with what I do. Personally, the way that my training's split up right now, I'm training my back, chest, shoulders, arms, calves, all twice a week. I'm training my legs and my abs just once a week. I am technically doing some sets of hamstrings on one of my back days, so technically I get like 2 times per week for hamstrings, but I only train my quads just once a week. And that's just because genetically speaking, I've got bigger quads than I have kind of any other body part. So for me, there's something that kind of come last on the playing field of exercise selections. I'm really trying to focus on growing my shoulders, my chest, my back. So I might increase these frequencies a little bit later on just to add in more total volume at a high intensity. But this is kind of essentially what I'm working with these days. So these are just kind of brief things. I know I missed a lot. I know there's still a lot more to add, and there will be more videos to follow this. But these are some of the basic things that I really just wish that I knew when I first started lifting weights, and I really hope this is helpful. If you have any questions about any of these specifics more in depth, if there's anything that you're kind of like, I wonder what my training would look like differently if I did X, Y, Z, feel free to leave a comment below. Reach out to my email, it's in my bio. Come work with us at Merrick Health if you want to get some lab work done. It's all super awesome. But again, I really hope you guys enjoyed today. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and have a great rest of your week. Bye.